tell a story about digital waste. And I'm just, for some reason, the screen is now, the GoToMeeting screen has come and dominated. I'm just going to see if I can quit.
It's fine. It's fine from our point of view.
Yeah, I just can't see my screen because it's in the way.
Yes, you just have to try and minimize it.
See if I quit. Oh, okay. Okay, good. So, I've been involved in the web since the mid-90s, quite early on, you know, first browsers and stuff like that, NCSA, Mosaic. And I used to be a big fan of Wired magazine, and I'd avidly look forward to buying it on a monthly basis. And around 1997, they had this particular issue that said, we're facing 25 years of prosperity, freedom, and a better climate, better environment for the whole world. You got a problem with that. And it was a classic Wired cover. And at that stage, I believed a lot of that stuff. But if we look at the scenario of where we're actually in coming into 2022, I'm not so sure it panned out like the tech visionaries thought it would pan out over these 25 years. So a lot of times people say, you know, about how technology is so efficient and how it's so wonderful. And I used to believe that it was inherently positive, that it was inherently green, and that stuff that we're doing here now results in the fact that, you know, I don't have to fly over. Obviously, we've got a pandemic and everything like that, but we had lots of scenarios of how remote working, oh, it's really, you know, it's saving the planet because we don't have to drive and we don't have to fly. But, you know, there's been a lot of flying going on in the last 40 or 50 years. Basically, world growth in air travel has grown very, very substantially. Of course, as usual, it's not evenly distributed. High income people far more likely to be flying medium income, and the poor people basically flying just as much or just as little as they did 40 or 50 years ago. But basically, we've an 8-fold increase over 4 decades, and it's accelerating. And I think partly why it's accelerating is because of technology. Ryanair, etc., cheap flights, where would they be without the web? And often what I find is technology being an accelerant of some of the worst behaviors we have as human beings, that it might achieve 1 in or twice as efficiency, but then it gets 3 or 4 times the use in the actual scenario. So we all know about that flying is not so good, and you know, a lot of CO2 in relation to flying, and the argument, the Zoom argument, etc. So there's a flight from London to Rome, about 234 kilogram, 986 if you're going to New York, if you're going to Los Angeles, 1.5 tons, and 3 tons if you're flying from London to Perth. That's an awful lot of CO2 per person. So we're all hoping that, you know, we'll solve that problem somehow. And this was a quote by someone in the US administration. You know, half of the emissions cuts will come from future tech. You know, we're always promising that just down the road there's a technology that's really going to solve this problem. But if we look at the growth in aviation's predicted emissions, and even with high efficiency improvements, we're still going to have a massive acceleration of, you know, emissions due to technology and the use of technology in the process. So the more efficient, the more use. Every efficiency is doubled from a use case scenario, certainly for the last 40 or 50 years. And what's one of the big solutions? Oh, space tourism now we're doing. So a long haul flight, a typical long haul flight, about 1 ton of CO2. Well, a space flight is 60 ton per passenger. And this is where we're going, you know, in the process. So basically, these promises are so constant, and I believed them, and I was, so to speak, peddling them for many years as well. Oh, Uber and Lyft, it's all going to be wonderful. Passengers are helping to reduce the carbon footprint. And a recent study from Carnegie Mellon shows that in cities that Uber and Lyft have been introduced, there's a 20% increase in CO2 from car traffic. So not alone is it not reducing, it's actually increasing. But of course, the big sell is that we are saving the world and we are wonderful and everything in technology is brilliant. Whereas in many cases, what I've discovered in my research, technology is the key accelerant of the climate crisis. As we see here, the massive growth in our processors, but every time we gain efficiency or we gain double or treble the use. And of course, material use is incredibly dominant in the technology space as well. So the world is going mad, you know, in extracting, and it's just accelerating the amount of materials that we're taking out of the planet. Raw material use to double by 2060. Electric vehicles are 4 times more mineral intensive in manufacture than our traditional vehicles. Yes, they are more environmentally friendly over their lifetime, but they don't have a zero carbon impact. Driving a mile in an electric vehicle is about 100 grams or so of CO2. We're driving in a typical gasoline or petrol car is about 200. Yeah, so definitely over the lifetime. But to build these things is extremely material intense. Demand for lithium batteries is exploding. You know, we're really struggling to get lithium in many places, and so many of these rare earth materials that are needed in electronics are found in, you know, areas of natural beauty, or you know, in the Congo with the Western lowland gorillas, where coltan is found, which is used in mobile phones and devices like that. You know, there's a stress on the planet building all this stuff. Over 50 million tons of e-waste is created every year, because the problem we have in our digital industry is we have very highly intensive devices. So there's a lot of high intensity to manufacture. They have very, very short life cycles, 2 or 3 years, and less than 20% is recycled. So, and this is what is the recycling in many environments. We dump a lot of our electronics in poorer countries, and it becomes recycled in the informal actual economy. So every year we create the e-waste, enough e-waste that could be used to build the Great Wall of China. That's how much e-waste we create every year, and it's getting worse. 54 million tons in 2019, doubling roughly every 15 years, and the vast majority of it is not properly recycled. There's a huge economy, 18 million children, 13 million women working in informal economies in Pakistan, in Ghana, in India, many countries like that, dealing with the e-waste from the global north. So we've been extraordinarily bad in relation to how we manage the end of life of our technologies. In fact, the entire tech industry is based around planned obsolescence, deliberately designing products that cannot be repaired. We have to bring in legislation now through the European Union or other environments to demand that technology companies create products that can actually be repaired, because many of them are deliberately designed so they cannot be repaired, because the absolute focus is on creating turnover and getting people to buy new tech every 2 or 3 years. A vintage car. Here you might think, well, this is from the 30s or the 40s. You think at least a vintage car is from the 60s or the 70s in the process. Well, what's a vintage computer? 2015, Apple declares 12-inch laptop is a vintage product. In other words, no more support. In what industry does something become vintage after 4 or 5 years? The technology. A smartphone in manufacture creates about 60 kg of CO2. So over its life, for a year of using a smartphone is somewhere in the region of about 5 kg. So in typical smartphones, about 80% of the pollution occurs during the manufacturing process. So most of the pollution is occurring during manufacture. Right? For a laptop, it's about 300 kgs of CO2. So global smartphone sales, 122 million in 2007, growing to about 1.5 billion in 2021. So that's about 15 billion smartphones manufactured since 2007 at 60 kgs of CO2 to manufacture each one. That's 900 million tons of CO2 just to manufacture smartphones. In relation to PCs, has declined and then it kind of stabilized over the years. Still 4.2 billion made since 2006, 2019. At 300 kg, that's 1.3 billion tons of CO2 just to manufacture PCs, laptops, and equivalent devices. So if there's one lesson that you might take away, it's hold on to your device. If you keep your device, highly intensive devices in their manufacturing process require a long life to have any sort of approach of sustainability. So let's say you work for 60 years and you change your phone every 3 years. You'll have roughly 20 devices over a 60-year working life. Keep it for 4 years, 15 devices. Keep it for 5 years, you'll have 12 devices. This would have a significant impact. We hold on to our devices. We repair our devices. We ask for devices that are modular, that can be repaired when we're looking for purchase. If you kept it for 20 years, you'd need 3 devices. An organization did an analysis of sustainability, how long devices should last. They found that washing machines should last about 17 years and that laptops should last about 20 years to, in any sense, be sustainable and not be so extractive on the actual planet. What is driving a lot of the use of these devices is the growth of data. Data is absolutely exploding. 2010, about 2 zettabytes. So you would have a better understanding of zettabytes than most people have. But I calculated how much, if you were to print out 1 zettabyte of data, how many trees would you need? And I calculated you'd need about 20 trillion trees to print out just one zettabyte of data. So there's only 3.5 trillion trees on the planet. So that's a hell of a lot of trees which we don't have, just for 1 zettabyte of data. So 2020, about 47, and then it's just exploding. 2035, over 2,000 zettabytes of data is predicted. Now, to store that data based on current prices would cost about $60 trillion. So it's not sustainable. And what I have discovered from working with so many organizations over the years, large organizations, whether Microsoft or Cisco or IKEA or the BBC or Rolls-Royce or whatever, that 90% of it is crap. 90%, and talking to lots of people who work in data centers, etc., 90% of what we create is absolutely crap data, because we have no model, because the whole culture in technology is collected and we find some sort of use for it later. It doesn't matter. All data is good data. Let's collect everything we possibly can and we'll sort it out later, or else the AI system will sort it out later in the process. So we essentially, data centers are glorified dumps, and we're paying a lot of money for dumps in the world, and it's creating a tremendous stress on the planet. So this was the first photograph, or that was taken about 1826, 1827, viewed from a window at Les Grasse, I think in Paris, right? So that was roughly in 1827 the first photography began, and by about 1900 there was 1 million photos taken. And over the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it didn't grow enormously. It began to grow a bit in 1980s, 1990s, began to show some movement. 2000 really started moving. 2010, between 2000 and 2010, serious growth. And 2020, phenomenal, between 2010 2020, phenomenal growth. So between 1900 and 2020, 13 trillion 297 billion 959 million 825,000 photographs actually taken. 1.4 trillion photos taken in 2020. More photos taken in 2020 than in the entire 20th century. and the vast majority of them are crap. They'll never be looked at again. But this is the world that we have created, a world of creators and producers and storers in the process. So the photo resolution. So at 1x is 1 megabyte, this size of a box. 2x is 4 megabytes. At 3x resolution, and 2x is more than enough for mobile devices or most laptops. Certainly 4x the eye can't see in the vast majority of situations. 8x is just vanity, 64 megabytes. So not just are we taking more photographs, but they're becoming heavier in the process. So the photos stored in the cloud at the moment in 2020, almost 8 trillion, 10 trillion by 2022. Trillions of actually photos, the vast majority of which will never be accessed again. So I did some calculations on the number of trees you'd need to plant to deal with the CO2 pollution just in relation to taking photos. And this model is based on that an average typical tree can sequester or deal with or cope with about 10 kg of CO2 a year. We need to plant 80 million for the taking of photos between 2000 and 2020. Another 50 million trees for the transfer of them up to the cloud. Assuming that they're all viewed just once, well, that's another 40 million trees. And storing them over the period from 2000 to 2020, about 515 million trees we need to plant just to deal with our photo habit. Let's look at email. So sending an email by physical, putting it into a letter, putting the stamp, etc., calculated about 29 grams. A study, I think about 10 years ago at this stage. But it gives us a sense of the CO2 impact of a physical letter. So a physical letter, about 28 grams. So then there's a whole bunch of studies or analysis around, what does an email actually create? And it's not totally agreed, but an email with an image could be somewhere around 8 grams. A HTML email with no image, about 6 grams, and text, about 2 grams. So basically, a lot of us are sending HTML emails just with text. Text is much lighter. A text email is 3 times lighter than the exact same email in HTML. Spam, about 0.3 of a gram, because most of the spam is caught at a server side. But with attachments, one study found that it could be up to 50 grams because people sending 4 megabyte or 10 megabyte attachments in the process. This gives us some sort of a model of the impact. So every year there are 400 billion letters posted, and every day there are 390 billion emails sent. So every year 400 billion letters, but every day 390 billion emails. 84% of them are spam, right, which is extraordinary. We need a tax on data. We have such extraordinarily bad habits in digital, and so much negative that's flowing around the world. So let's have a look at those figures. So letters, yearly 0.4 trillion images, and I'm just assuming we have an equivalence across the HTML and text. So about 18 trillion between image, HTML and text, with attachments about 5 trillion, and spam is 120 trillion. So 120 trillion spam are sent every year, right? Trillions. So translating that into CO2 in relation to our 10 kg for a tree. So letters, the million ton of CO2. 12 million ton for letters, with images 46, with HTML 34, with text 11, with attachments 270, because remember it's 50 grams on average, and spam 36 million ton. So 36 million ton problem of spam every year, CO2 problem. And often, just as an interesting aside, there's often a link between the quality of the internet and the number of attachments. The worse the internet, the more attachments that actually occur. So the number of trees you need to plant. to deal with that. 1.2 billion to deal with physical letters, with images 4.6 billion, 3.4, with text 1.1, with attachments 27 billion trees you need to plant, and 3.6 billion trees every year to deal with spam. Let's a look at, you know, do we even read our emails? So reading emails, out of 100 hours of work, one study found about 28 hours are taken reading emails, right? But for every 100 emails that are sent, 35 are unread. And for every 100 emails with attachments that are sent, only 6 are opened. Only 6 are actually opened, right? So let's add those calculations together. This is just pure waste, right? So this is just pure absolute waste. Billions of trees wasted on unread image emails, 1.6 billion, on unread HTML emails, 1.2 billion, on unread text emails, 0.4 billion, on spam, 3.6, on opened attachments, 25 billion. So we are wasting 32 billion trees would need to be planted every year just to deal with the pure waste that comes through email. Communicating with technology. I don't, you know, generally in most of these situations, I don't use the screen for the reasons that I'll actually explain, but in this situation, make an exception. An analog audio, so that's old thing that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, you know, that used to have a wire and you picked up at the home and was plugged into your wall. An hour's worth of communication with that, I saw a study that estimated that created about 3.6 megabyte of data. The exact same hour with VoIP audio is 27 megabyte. So this is progress. So we do audio over the web, and it's about 7 times more inefficient than doing audio over an old telephone line. But of course, we want standard video, and that's 270 megabytes. And let's say we went to HD video, that would be 540 megabytes. And that's for 2 people spending an hour in a session. If we go to 4K, it's 9,000. If we go to 8K video, it's 36,000 megabytes. You know, so what's that? 36 gigabytes an hour for 8K video. So from 4 to 36,000, is that progress? My area has been the web, right? You know, 2005.4 of a megabyte an average page size, 2015 to 2024, the vast majority of websites absolutely have no reason to be more than a megabyte in size, and a huge number of them could be a couple of 100 kilobyte maximum. It's just really bad practice. Lazy design, lazy development, arrogance and ego that gets you to 4 megabyte or 8 megabyte size pages. All of this has a weight. All of this creates CO2. All of this creates a culture of waste, right? Seconds for the average mobile page to download. A lot of people in a lot of countries can no longer use the web, particularly in poorer countries. They end up only using Facebook because they've got an all-you-can-eat plan with Facebook, but going out to the web is prohibitive in relation to their data plans in the process. An average mobile phone trying to download an average web page in 2019 was 27 seconds. Absolutely ridiculous. JavaScript growth, 600% growth, 2011 to 2019. Vast majority of websites don't even need JavaScript in the process. Vanity, arrogance, and ego. Custom fonts, the same. Vanity, arrogance, and ego. 850% growth. Vast majority of people can't even see the difference between the fonts in the process. So this huge growth of creating more and more and more and more stuff. How do we take action if we want to take action? What could we do? So digital waste reduction principles. We have to identify the true cost of things, right? We talk about data centers and only their electrical usage. We don't talk about the servers, which a server in a data center can create at least 1 ton of CO2 during its manufacture, but we don't even measure that at the moment. We talk about our electrical efficiency. Often the reasons we've improved electrical efficiency in data centers is we use more water in the process. So we need to start talking about true cost of digital, not just the cost that we like to talk about. We need to do less, create less, stop creating crap data. You know, start saying we don't need to store this, we don't need to collect this in the process. Start using our brains more and making better decisions. And we need to make digital waste visible, because most people have no clue about this, have no idea that the images that they've taken are being stored in a physical place. And that place is consuming energy. Right now, data centers in Ireland are consuming 10% of our electricity. So that's not an insignificant quantity of electricity, and that's just the electricity cost. Forget about the water or all the other costs. So the true cost. So, you know, we look at the cost to ourselves. The reason why websites are so big are because it's developer convenience. It's much easier to shove down a framework with 400 kilobyte of CSS than to actually say, well, we only need 14 kilobyte of CSS here. You know, it's much easier just to shove a framework down with the 400 and a framework of whatever JavaScript, etc. in the process. So we have to go away from our own convenience and the organizational convenience and look out. You know, and I used to think this is where it stopped. You know, user experience, human-centered design, but really we have to look beyond that, the impact of what we do. And, you know, a lot of the cost is usually in the device. These devices that we are creating are creating tremendous poison in landfills, etc., because of the toxicity of so many digital devices. And of course, the overall health. So we need, I often used to talk about user experience design, and I'm talking about earth experience design. We need to broaden and get the entire cost and calculate those into the decisions that we're making. So the cost to make, the cost to use and reuse, the cost to maintain, and the end of life cost, a true end of life cost. Design things that can be reused, design things that can be repaired, design things that can be easily recycled. You know, the recycling industry really struggles with electronics because they're extraordinarily difficult to take apart, and they're often deliberately, and they're getting worse. Apple is getting worse and worse and worse. Every year, Apple gets worse and worse in its design for actual, you know, taking it apart and recycling. Degrowth, consume less, enjoy more. We don't need to take 1.4 trillion photos. We're not happy. You know, people have 20, 25,000 photos on their phone. They can't find any photos then. They can't find the real photos that matter. And we must focus on digital waste, data waste and e-waste. Data, organize, reuse, share, archive, delete 90%. You know, get in strategies where, you know, we don't send attachments, where we send text emails when we have to. We delete, you know, we only keep 2 years of email. Why do we need 4 or 5 years? We don't need that stuff. We can live without it, you know, and all of those behaviors adding together could make a real difference. Devices, maintain, hold on to, long life. There's now a movement in Europe for a 10-year phone to demand that phones should last at least 10 years. Big right to repair movement sweeping the world at the moment. And visualize. So one of the ways I've been communicating is in trees, you know, talking about, you know, trying to give these as, well, how many trees would we need to plant to deal with this? So the average tree absorbs about 10 kg of CO2 per year. And let's just estimate that one tree has 10,000 leaves. Of course, trees have all sorts of different levels of leaves, but let's just for simplicity say one tree is 10,000 leaves. That means one leaf is to 1 gram of CO2. So a HTML email without an image is about 6 leaves. So imagine in that scenario, if we could create models, responsive operating systems, whatever, that would show the impacts of our decisions. If we send a text email, it's just 2 leaves that are required to deal with that text email. And of course, if we send no email, that's even better. Thank you for listening.
Gerry, that was terrific. Thank you very much indeed for that very inspiring talk. I'm throwing the floor open to questions. You can either use the question box or unmute yourselves and come straight in. I mean, from my point of view, I've been flabbergasted. I've probably, yeah, I've probably caused the need for 10,000 trees this year alone.
Well, it's my own. I mean, I flabbergast myself. I think of, you know, because I've been involved in all this so long, and it's really on the last couple of years that I realized this. So I'm more than flabbergasted the amount of stuff I've bought and thrown away, and I
wonder if there's an app that you could use to calculate your own waste footprint. But over to Alexander Forbes.
So negative externalities exist in pretty much every industry. There's nothing unique to IT. In terms of the storage of data and the sort of impact and the environmental impact on that, well, the mechanism for controlling that is cost, right? I mean, as you say, there's a cost to running a data center in terms of power. There's a cost for storage in terms of buying and shipping hard drives, and that cost is borne by the company storing the data. I presume the largest companies are, you know, Google, Facebook, Netflix, these sorts of organizations, Amazon, and what have you. So they're obviously making a business decision that the cost of storing and processing and transmitting this data is worth it. Google have decided it is worth storing this 90 whatever % of information that is only ever accessed once. So how is your view that we should affect? I mean, you mentioned earlier a tax on data. Is your view that we need to start legislating in, or we need to start using taxation or other schemes to try and drive efficiencies there? Or is your view that these organizations should make an impact on that? Because they're obviously making a decision that it's worth storing all this redundant information that they're apparently not processing.
Well, they will store. Great question. They will store it because they make money off it. They've convinced us that we should store everything. I mean, it's fabulous marketing. I mean, they run dumps, and we pay a lot of money for a dump. The vast majority of, you know, I dealt with one organization yesterday that has a 120,000 page website, and 100,000 of those pages has never been reviewed in the last 10 years. Not one. Nobody's looked at it in the organization in the last 10 years to see, is it up to date, out of date? And that's just totally par for the course. When we go into environments, we have to delete 90% of the environment before we can begin cleaning up and doing information architecture design and good search design. Let's get rid of the 90% of crap first. That's actually not just useless, but it's damaging, it's clogging the search, or doing all sorts of stuff. So Google has convinced us that we should store this, and they're charging us for it. So it's a great business model for Google, and it's a great business model for Microsoft. And, you know, there's a culture of store everything, and you will have an organization, the vast majority of organizations, they'll invest in a new supercomputer that'll give them 0.000 of improved performance, but they will invest nothing in the longevity of devices or repairability, or, you know, there's a cult of performance and maximum uptime. The vast majority of websites don't need to be uptime 99.9%, but we make a huge cost for that because we trash our servers every 2 or 3 years because we're always looking for 99.9% performance in the process. So there's a whole cult that we have bought into, that we should take everything, capture every image and store everything, and they make a lot of money out of us.
Well, so I'm not sure about that. I think a lot of people using these services are using them effectively at no cost to themselves because the money's made on advertising or data being sold by those organizations. I mean, yes, there will be people who are paying to store data remotely, but they're making a choice there that they are comfortable paying for that storage and making use of it. So if they yes, it may be better overall if they deleted this stuff, but I don't think you can drive that change of behavior. I'm also not entirely sure on this idea that the transfer of information entails the same level of cost, because a lot of that infrastructure needs to be in place anyway, and whether it's loaded at 2% or 100%, normally there's not that much impact on its electricity consumption. Or and again, if the lion's share of the cost is in putting that infrastructure in place, whether you need that infrastructure in place for 10 megabits a second or terabits a second doesn't really matter. That upfront cost and that carbon sink still applies.
But that's always the excuse, isn't it? Oh, we built this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure. We have to use it now. Well, the multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure, the internet is the biggest infrastructure ever created by human societies, has a massive cost. Those servers create a ton of CO2 for manufacture. Some of them create 2 tons. I mean, this idea that, oh, let's not talk about the infrastructure, let's just use it. We should talk about the infrastructure. The infrastructure is incredibly damaging to the future of the planet. And advertising is the worst possible model. So we have created, Google needs to sell us the worst possible crap to make their business model work. It creates fast fashion. We buy 5 times more clothes than we did 25 years ago, and we use them half as long. Everything what digital has done, what the free model does, is accelerates the worst quality products with the shortest lifespan. And that's why we're in a crisis, because we are the generation of wasters. Our parents, would be utterly ashamed of us, our behaviors. We waste at a level that humans have never, ever, ever wasted. And it is technology that accelerates and drives that waste behavior. And if we don't radically change, we won't have a planet in 30 or 40 years. We certainly won't have a livable one.
Thanks very much. You're obviously very passionate about this. Jalal-Uddin has been waiting patiently for some 10 minutes to raise a question.
Okay.
Jalal? You're muted, Jalal. You have to unmute yourself to speak. While Jalal is sorting out his audio, there is a question here from Matthew Crowell. I hope I've pronounced that right. How many trees did this meeting cost?
Well, it would be interesting.
Great presentation, he says, with the shortages of power around the world that we're using. We are using that power to store crap. Who's at fault? The providers giving us all this cheap space, or the users that use it?
Well, it's an interesting question, because free is the most expensive thing. Free costs the earth, because they have to be getting it back somehow. The Facebook model, the Google model. I think we need a legislative approach as well as a behavior change. So there's 3 actors. There's the governmental, there's the technical, the companies or the brands, and there's us. And we all need to move together. But I think we need radically different business models within technology. The Facebook model, the Google model, selling our data, they only work if we consume more. So, I think we need legislation. We absolutely need legislation, but we need behavior change as well. So hopefully we need to get the 3 of them moving together, because if only one of them moves, like Apple and Microsoft have just announced that they are going to get an independent review of their products for repairability, and that they are going to implement the findings of that review within the next 18 months. And that's because of shareholder pressure, activist shareholders, and societal change. So we see, you know, in the UK, Prince William, the movement for the right to repair. There's a movement occurring that we should hold on to things longer. This idea that we should change things every 2 or 3 years, you know, most of our phones, we don't need to change them. You know, so I think it's a legislative, a societal, and a brand, you know, organizational change, and we all need to be moving at roughly the same pace.
Yes, thank you. We had another question from George Finnegan. How big a factor do you think the instant gratification culture is on the problems you have mentioned? So needing things here and now and fast. How feasible is it that we can challenge this culture?
With that, I think that's another great question, because digital is speed. You know, so there's a movement now, another movement in the world to slowness. You see, you know, in Wales, they're looking at a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. In Barcelona, etc., getting cars out of the cities. It's not e-cars we need, it's bicycles we need, it's more walking we need in the process. So this speed creates a huge churning of resources, creates unstable products that have no longevity to them, the vast majority of them. So slowing down, we can't stop. You know, I love technology in the process. Everyone on this call does as well. But the movement towards slow food, slow days, slow living is in so many areas better living. Cities become, you know, we wonder, you know, why can our children play? You know, I remember visiting Dublin when I was a child. We stayed a weekend, and you know, we played outside we played on the street for most of the weekend. This was probably in the early 70s or whatever. You couldn't possibly do that in Dublin today, and it's because of cars, you know, and the speed limits, etc. But there's a reclaiming of a livable world. That a certain amount of speed is necessary, but we are moving too fast. Too fast for ourselves, too fast for our children, and too fast for the planet. And we need to slow down. So I think that instant gratification is the ultimate expression of that trippiness being on speed. And it's how do we withdraw from that addiction that so many of us, including myself, have developed over the last 20 years.
I have a last question for you, and it's about a definition. You used the term the informal economy a few times during your speech. Is there a formal definition of that? I've not heard of it before.
Well, what that would be, say, in e-waste, so what happens with a lot of e-waste from Ireland or the UK or Norway, a place like that, is it gets shipped to Pakistan or gets shipped to Ghana or India or places like that. And that isn't even often formal, but let's say half of the time that goes through regular accounting and etc. And but when it arrives in Pakistan or Ghana or whatever, it gets sent out into so-called cottage industry. Just people get handed, you know, a bunch of laptops or whatever, and they have to disassemble them. So women or children or whatever, so they're not working for a company, they're working on piece rate or something like that. So that would be the informal economy, the economy that is not, you know, not be paying taxes or that sort of area. There are other different names for that economy. But that idea, they estimate about 18 million women, 13 million children, some children as young as 5. And the reason why they use young children is because to pull out the wires are so thin in these devices that they need the dexterous little fingers of small children. And of course, as they're doing this, they get poisoned. As they're burning, they burn those cables to get rid of the outer coating to get to the lead or whatever in the center, and those fumes, etc. So that most of e-waste goes through the informal economy or the criminal economy. There's a whole bunch of criminals who come into cities when they know that e-waste has been left out at 6 o'clock and has been collected at 8 o'clock by the municipality. They'll come at 6 o'clock and they'll get it all, and then they'll bring it to Bulgaria or Romania or places like that. So there's a lot of e-waste is both the informal and the criminal economy, because we don't want to know about e-waste, basically. We want to ignore it as much as possible. And I think when we really face up to it, that will slow down the creation of these disposable products that we create at such a phenomenal pace.
Thanks very much. That's a brilliant answer. I'm going to have to drop off. I have a meeting at 8 o'clock, but Chris has reminded me there are people in the room who may wish to ask questions as well. So Chris, I'll hand over to you.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Ian. Okay, having said that, are there any questions in the room? Yeah, no one here wants questions. So nobody here wants questions.
I would say that my wife's cousin is working in agroagronomy, which they showed agroagronomy, the sort of heaven on earth in Ghana, and he's working with community groups there to provide solar-powered washrooms and lavatories. So I mean, it's kind of a side touch, but that's what he's doing.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, you finished?
Yeah.
So thanks, Gerry. It's a really interesting talk. You paint obviously rightly a very bleak picture. You know, considering that is just one aspect of, you know, societal use of resource. You know, you mentioned air travel at the start, but there are obviously numerous other examples as well. In your sort of heart of hearts, is there really any way back from this? I appreciate that's more of a philosophical than technical question.
Yeah, it's a bit of a. I think. I mean, I don't know if you know about a philosopher called Hannah Arendt, and somebody I admire a lot, and she wrote. I saw an article about her in a magazine recently, and she was talking about, you know, she survived the Nazis, and a Jewish philosopher survived Hitler's Germany, or left just before he came to power. And she said, in times of great crisis, hope is a luxury, action is a necessity. And I think, you know, oftentimes I do feel a bit hopeless, but I never stop at stopping some sort of action. So I say, well, I'm in a scenario where I can do something. You know, I have certain capacities, I have certain abilities. I'm going to do what I can do. I think, you know, I think that's all we can do. You know, do what we can do. I'm quite surprised positively, like when I look at BBC or Channel 4 now, stations like that. I mean, every second program is about the environment. So I do think there's a real shift in thinking that has occurred quite quickly, you know, about the idea of fossil fuels, etc. So, you know, we could be surprised at how quickly we can change. But I think we have, you know, those of us who can act should act. And if that only means holding on to a phone, like I saw a study that said in 2019, Americans bought 150 million phones. In 2020, they only bought 120 million phones. Still an awful lot of phones, you know, but it's a significant reduction. And one of the reasons for that was that they were getting them repaired more, and people are asking to repair their stuff. So I think, you know, I don't know about hope, but, you know, let's try and do what we can do. And if we believe in this stuff, to become evangelists, because so many people are still not aware of the issues. They've got green bins and brown bins, but they think data has no cost, and that it literally is in the cloud, and that you know, it doesn't matter what. So I think we could be evangelists of better behavior, and really use technology, because it truly can be extraordinarily helpful, but not when it is a tremendous engine of waste. So let's act in the best possible way we can and treat hope as a luxury.
Okay,
More questions, Gerry. Any insights, please, onto Twitter and how many leaves that uses per minute?
Yeah, Twitter is
did you get that, Gerry?
Yeah, about Twitter. Twitter, I don't have the exact data.
How much data is used by Twitter in comparison?
By Twitter. Twitter is reasonably light because, well, it depends again on whether you communicate just by text or by image or by video. I mean, there's huge leaps when you go from different formats. Text is the most environmentally friendly form of communication. So an ordinary text tweet is one of the lightest forms of communication in the process. Not zero. I know it's somewhere in my book. You can read the book for free if you want, you know, on my website. And there's something about it at some stage on how much a tweet, how much CO2. It's it's much less than an email, but it's still something.
So back to the point that I mentioned earlier, that other industries have had these sorts of problems. For example, fridges and refrigerators, we had a problem with in the UK for a while, where the costs of disposal weren't factored in. Likewise, things like recycling. Do you think if we put some equivalent carbon taxation or some kind of recycling or repurposing cost into the supply chain, that would solve it? Because I think at the moment, if you look at just from a sort of IT perspective, and you look at this from a communications infrastructure and a server infrastructure and so on, you don't capture the fact that this is a problem that's being faced by every industry that does any form of manufacturing or distribution, from shipping containers and the problems that we've got now with very dirty fuels being used in large shipping airlines, with the reduction in air travel, and the problems they're having around recycling airframes and so on. I don't see this as an IT unique issue. I think it's something.
No, you're totally right. No, totally. I mean, it's not, but we don't create IT that is easy to recycle. And I think, as you indicate, you know, a type of recycling, like in solar panels in the European Union, the people who sell solar panels must factor into the cost their return, just like a fridge. So, you know, if all phone manufacturers were obligated to take back and properly recycle everything, we'd see a lot of change in the process. So I do, legislation will definitely help, but I think we all, so it definitely will. So, and then they'll start creating more repairable, more reusable. If it's mandated that you have to provide security updates for 10 years and you must create warranties for 10 years for a device, we will see change. So, you know, I think the legislative component, it really is essential, and the same principle of the fridge and those sorts of ideas, that particular type of legislation, I think would be very positive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Gerry, I think we need to bring it to a close now, unless there's any desperately urgent questions.
Any more questions? No?
Okay. So thank you very much for an inspiring talk.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Gerry.
Thank you, and great questions. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything anybody's got anything to say? I just say something now. This business of the BCS as object